I left my 6-year-old daughter at my mother-in-law's house for exactly 12 hours. When I picked her up the next morning, she was clutching her doll so tightly her knuckles were white. She leaned close to my ear and whispered something that made my blood run cold. Mommy Grandma said I should never tell you what I saw in the trunk of your car. She said if I told you the police would take you away forever. I asked her what she saw. Her answer did not just end my marriage, it started a war that would leave one of us in handcuffs. My name is Gwendolyn, and at 33 years old, I am a landscape architect who thought I had finally earned my place in my husband's family. I was wrong. Before I tell you how a bag of white powder and a 6-year-old's testimony destroyed a dynasty, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Please hit that subscribe button if you have ever had a family member smile to your face while holding a knife to your back. The nightmare began on a Tuesday evening inside my mother-in-law Patricia's townhouse in Beacon Hill. The dining room smelled of old money and judgment. The heavy mahogany table was set with silver that cost more than my first car, and the silence was suffocating. Patricia sat at the head of the table, slicing her steak with surgical precision. She did not look at me when she spoke. "So, Gwendolyn, how is your little gardening business coming along?" I gripped my fork tighter. "I am a landscape architect, Patricia. We are currently redesigning the city's botanical wetlands project. It is a government contract." Patricia finally looked up, her eyes empty and cold. "It involves dirt and digging, doesn't it?" "It is gardening, dear. Let us not dress it up. You always did have an affinity for getting your hands dirty. It must be how you were raised." My husband Neil sat next to me, chewing his food in silence. He never defended me. He claimed he was a peacemaker, but really he was just a coward. Patricia wiped her mouth with a linen napkin. "You look exhausted, Gwendolyn. Those bags under your eyes are becoming quite prominent. I suppose manual labor does that to a woman. Leave Lily here tonight." I froze. Lily was sitting quietly next to her grandmother, looking small in the massive chair. "No, that is okay. I can take her home. I have to prep for the presentation tomorrow morning." "That is exactly why you should leave her," Patricia insisted, her voice dropping to that dangerous tone that sounded like advice but felt like a command. "You cannot focus on your little presentation if you are worrying about breakfast and school drop-offs. Neil, tell your wife to be reasonable for once." I looked at Neil, silently begging him to say no. We had a rule about not leaving Lily alone with Patricia because she always came home acting strange. But Neil just shrugged. "Mom is right, Gwen. You have been stressed lately. Let Mom watch her. It is just one night. Do not be selfish." Selfish. That was their favorite word for me whenever I tried to set a boundary. The pressure in the room was physical, like the walls were closing in. I looked at Lily. She smiled weakly at me, unaware of the tension. "Fine," I said, defeated. "Just one night. I will pick her up at 7 sharp tomorrow morning." "Wonderful." Patricia beamed. Her entire demeanor changed instantly. She rang the little silver bell for the maid. As the maid entered to clear the plates, I saw it. It was brief, almost imperceptible. Patricia looked at the maid and gave a slow, deliberate wink. It wasn't a friendly wink. It was the signal of a plan set in motion. A knot tightened in my stomach as I kissed Lily goodbye, walking out into the freezing Boston air, not knowing I had just walked away from my daughter and straight into a trap. The sun had barely risen over the Charles River when I pulled up to the townhouse the next morning. A light snow had fallen overnight, covering the black iron fence in a layer of white, but the walkway to Patricia's door was perfectly shoveled. That was Patricia. She controlled the elements just as tightly as she controlled her family. My stomach churned as I unlocked the front door. I expected the usual chaos of breakfast or the sharp sound of Patricia barking orders at the staff. Instead, the house was submerged in a heavy, suffocating silence. It felt less like a home and more like a stage set waiting for the actors to take their places. I found them in the formal sitting room. Patricia was already fully dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, not a hair out of place, sitting on the velvet settee. Lily was perched on the edge of the chair opposite her, her small legs dangling. She looked pale. When she saw me, she did not run into my arms like she usually did. She just stared, her eyes wide and glassy. "Good morning, Gwendolyn," Patricia said. Her voice lacked its usual razor-sharp edge. It was smooth, almost musical. "You are prompt. I admire that." I walked over to Lily, crouching down to check her temperature. She felt cold. I asked if she slept okay. Before Lily could answer, Patricia stood up and clapped her hands together softly. She slept like an angel. "We had a wonderful time, didn't we, darling? In fact, I have a little parting gift." Patricia reached behind a cushion and pulled out a porcelain doll. It was terrifyingly exquisite, with curly blonde hair and a dress made of real lace. It looked like an antique, the kind of thing Patricia usually kept behind locked glass cabinets. "This is for you, Lily," Patricia said, pressing the doll into my daughter's reluctant arms. "It has been in our family for generations. I think it is time you had something of value to take care of." I tried to protest. That doll looked like it cost more than my mortgage payment, and a 6-year-old was bound to break it. But Patricia waved me off. "Nonsense. She needs to learn responsibility. Now off you go. You have that big presentation, do not you?" She walked us to the door, her hand resting heavily on Lily's shoulder. As I fumbled for my car keys, Patricia leaned against the doorframe. Her smile did not reach her eyes. "Oh, and Gwendolyn," she called out, stopping me halfway down the steps. "Drive carefully on your way to the office. I heard on the news that the state police are doing random stops on the highway this morning. They are being very thorough with their inspections, especially with older cars like yours." I paused, looking back at her. It was a strange thing to say. Patricia never watched the local news. She called it pedestrian. But before I could ask her what she meant, she gently closed the heavy oak door, the click of the lock echoing like a gunshot in the morning air. I buckled Lily into the back seat, checking the rearview mirror. The curtains in the front window twitched. She was watching us leave. The heater in my sedan rattled as we drove away from Beacon Hill, fighting against the morning chill. I turned the radio down, expecting Lily to fill the silence with her usual stories about school or cartoons. But the back seat remained deadly quiet. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Lily was staring out the window, her small body rigid, clutching that porcelain doll as if it were a lifeline. Her face was pale, almost gray in the winter light. "Lily, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You are very quiet. Did something happen at Grandma's house? Did she yell at you?" Lily shook her head rapidly, her eyes darting to the back of my head and then down to her lap. She looked terrified. Not just shy, but genuinely afraid. "Mommy," she whispered. Her voice was so small I almost missed it over the sound of the tires on the slushy road. "What is it, baby? You can tell me anything." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "Grandma said it is a secret. A special secret just between us. She said if I tell you, the bad men will come." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. My mother-in-law was manipulative, but threatening a 6-year-old was a new low. I softened my tone. "Grandma is just being silly. There are no bad men. Tell me the secret, Lily. I promise nothing bad will happen." Lily leaned forward against the seatbelt, her voice trembling. "Grandma put a bag of white stuff in your car last night. She called it magic flour. She hid it under the big spare tire in the trunk." I felt my heart stop. The blood drained from my face. "White powder, spare tire. What did you say?" I asked, my voice barely a croak. "She put it under the tire." Lily repeated, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. "She told me that when the police stop us, they will find it. And then they will take you away to a place with bars on the windows. She said you would be gone forever, and then I would get to live with her and Daddy in the big house. She said I had to be a brave girl and not say a word." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Patricia's parting words about the police checkpoints suddenly crashed into my mind with the force of a freight train. "Drive carefully. The state police are doing random stops." It was not a warning, it was a forecast. I slammed on the brakes, the tires locked up on a patch of black ice, and the car fishtailed violently before skidding to a halt on the shoulder of the empty road. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. This was not a prank. This was not just family drama. My mother-in-law had just planted drugs in my vehicle and sent me driving straight toward a police trap with her own granddaughter in the back seat. I unbuckled my seatbelt with shaking hands, threw the door open, and ran to the trunk. I had to know if it was true. I scrambled out of the driver's seat, my boots skidding on the slushy asphalt. The cold air bit at my exposed face, but I was sweating. I ran to the back of the car and popped the trunk. My hands were trembling so violently I could barely grip the latch. I threw open the lid, staring down at the mess of reusable grocery bags and my gym kit. It looked normal. It looked innocent. But Lily's whisper was echoing in my ears like a siren. I began tearing everything out, tossing my yoga mat and the emergency roadside kit onto the snowbank. I ripped up the carpeted liner that covered the wheel well. Beneath it lay the spare tire screwed down tight. I dropped to my knees on the wet pavement, my fingers fumbling with the wing nut that held the tire in place. It was rusted and cold, biting into my skin as I twisted it with frantic desperation. Finally, it gave way. I heaved the heavy rubber tire aside, my breath coming in ragged clouds of steam. There it was. Tucked neatly into the well, right where the tire iron usually sat, was a gallon-sized freezer bag. It was not flour. Even from here, I could see the crystalline shimmer of the white powder. It was methamphetamine, a massive amount of it. Next to the bag was a thick stack of cash bound tightly with rubber bands. Old, worn bills. It looked like drug money. It looked like a transaction. My mind went blank with sheer terror. Without thinking, I reached down and grabbed the bag, pulling it up to eye level, as if to confirm it was not a hallucination. The weight of it was heavy, undeniable. I stared at the jagged white rocks inside my brain, trying to process the impossible. My mother-in-law, the pillar of Boston society, had planted enough narcotics in my car to put me away for 20 years. Then the realization hit me like a physical blow to the gut. I dropped the bag back into the wheel well as if it were burning hot. "Oh God," I whispered to the empty woods. I touched it. I stared at my hands. I had just put my fingerprints all over the plastic. Patricia knew I would look. She knew I would panic. She had orchestrated this perfectly. If the police stopped me now, I wouldn't just look like a user. With the cash and the quantity, I would look like a dealer. I was standing on the side of a deserted road, with a felony amount of drugs, my fingerprints on the evidence, and my 6-year-old daughter in the back seat. This was not just about custody anymore. This was an assassination of my entire life. I looked back at the car. Lily was watching me through the rear window, her face pressed against the glass. She looked terrified. I had to get rid of it. I had to throw it into the woods. But then I looked at the snow. My footprints were everywhere. If I tossed it and the police had dogs, they would find it in minutes, covered in my scent just feet from my car. That would look even worse. It would look like I was ditching the stash during a pursuit. I was trapped. I was completely and utterly trapped. I slammed the trunk shut, the sound cracking through the silence. I needed help. I needed someone who knew Patricia's game but wasn't under her spell. My phone. I needed to call Neil. He had to know. He had to stop this. I scrambled back into the driver's seat, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and dialed my husband's number with shaking fingers. I dialed Neil's number, my fingers slipping on the glass screen. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Pick up, Neil. Please, for once in your life, be on my side." "Hello?" His voice was impatient, the background hum of his open-plan office audible behind him. "Neil. Listen to me." I gasped, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. "I need you to come get us right now. Your mother planted drugs in my car. There is a bag of meth and thousands of dollars in the spare tire well. Lily told me she did it. Neil, she is trying to frame me." I expected shock. I expected him to shout, to ask if I was safe, to threaten to burn his mother's house down. Instead, there was a heavy, exhausted sigh on the other end of the line. "Gwen, stop. Just stop. Stop." "Neil, did you hear me? I am holding a felony amount of narcotics that your mother put in my trunk. Mom called me 5 minutes ago." Gwen. Neil cut me off, his tone cold and detached. She was crying. "She said you looked erratic when you picked up Lily. She said your pupils were dilated and you were shaking. She told me you were ranting about the police. I am shaking because I am terrified," I screamed, hitting the steering wheel with my free hand. "She set me up, Neil. She wants to take Lily. She is not setting you up, she is trying to help you." Neil snapped. We have known for months that you have not been yourself. The long hours, the weight loss, the mood swings. Mom thinks you have relapsed or started using something to cope with the stress of this project. She called the police, Gwen. Not to arrest you, but to do a wellness check. It is an intervention. The phone nearly slipped from my sweating hand. The air in the car suddenly felt too thin to breathe. This was not just a frame job. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. Patricia had spent months planting seeds of doubt in Neil's weak mind, my exhaustion from work, my stress twisting them so that when this moment came, it would look like a breakdown, not a crime. You think I am a drug addict? I whispered, tears of pure rage burning my eyes. I am your wife. I am the mother of your child. I am doing this for Lily, he said, his voice sounding robotic, rehearsed. If you have nothing to hide, just wait for the police. They will help you get into a treatment center. Mom has already arranged a bed for you at a facility in Vermont. She paid for it herself. Vermont. That was a long-term lockdown facility. They wanted to warehouse me. They wanted to bury me in the system while they took my daughter and my inheritance. Just stay put, Gwen. Do not make this harder than it is. The line went dead. He hung up on me. My husband, the man who stood at the altar and vowed to protect me, had just signed off on my destruction. He was not coming to save me. He was part of the demolition crew. I stared at the phone, the screen turning black, reflecting my own horrified face. I looked back at Lily. She was watching me, her eyes wide with understanding. I was completely, utterly alone. And then the silence of the woods was broken by a sound that made my blood freeze. The faint, rising wail of a siren. The siren was not a warning, it was a hunting call. In the rear-view mirror, the flashing blue lights cut through the gray winter morning like a knife. A state trooper cruiser was coming up fast in the left lane, speeding past the morning commuters, my breath caught in my throat. I watched as the cruiser pulled level with my sedan. He did not pass. The officer inside slowed down, matching my speed perfectly. Through the tinted glass, I saw his head turn. He was looking right at me. He was looking at my license plate. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack a bone. Patricia had timed this perfectly. She knew exactly which route I took to work. She knew exactly when I would be on this stretch of road. The officer dropped back behind me. He did not turn on his full sirens yet, but I could see him speaking into his radio. He was running the plate. In seconds, he would see the flag my mother-in-law had planted. Wellness check. Potential narcotics possession. Unstable subject. If I pulled over now, it was over. They would search the car. They would find the bag with my fingerprints. They would take Lily. And once Lily was in the system, Patricia would swoop in with her lawyers and her grandmotherly concern and take custody. I would be the junkie mom who lost everything. I looked at Lily in the rearview mirror. She was hugging her knees, eyes wide with terror. "Mommy, are the police coming for us?" she asked, her voice trembling. I made a split-second decision that would change the course of my life. I was not going to stop. "No, baby," I said, forcing my voice to be steady. "We are playing a game. We are going to see Uncle Dante. But we have to get there fast." Up ahead, a narrow service road cut through the dense pine forest, a shortcut locals use to bypass the highway traffic during storms. It was unpaved and covered in fresh snow, but my car had all-wheel drive. Without signaling, I jerked the steering wheel hard to the right. The sedan skidded, tires screaming against the slush before biting into the gravel of the service road. Behind me, the cruiser's siren finally chirped a short, angry blast, but he missed the turn. I saw him brake hard, his brake lights flaring red against the snow, but by the time he could turn that heavy cruiser around, I would be deep in the woods. I floored the accelerator. The car bounced violently over the frozen ruts. Mud and snow sprayed up against the windshield. I drove like a woman possessed, my knuckles white on the leather wheel. I was not running from the law. I was running toward the only law that mattered. Dante. Dante was Neil's brother-in-law, a man Patricia despised. She called him the charity case because her husband had adopted him from foster care. But Dante had grown up to become a federal prosecutor. He was brilliant, terrifying, and the only person on earth who hated Patricia as much as I did right now. If the local police caught me, I was dead. Patricia owned them. But the feds, that was Dante's territory. Hold on tight, Lily, I said, gritting my teeth as the car fishtailed around a sharp bend. I wove through the back roads, avoiding the main arteries where the checkpoints would be. My GPS screamed at me to make a U-turn, but I ignored it. Every shadow looked like a cop car. Every noise sounded like a siren. I was a suburban architect, a PTA mom, and now I was a fugitive with a trunk full of meth. But as the skyline of Boston came into view, gray and imposing, I felt a cold resolve settle over me. Patricia wanted a war, she just started one, and I was bringing the one weapon she never accounted for. I was bringing the truth to the one man who could use it to burn her world to the ground. The tires crunched over frozen gravel as I navigated the winding service road, putting distance between myself and the state trooper. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely grip the wheel, but my mind was racing faster than the engine. I knew exactly where I was going. I was heading to the federal building in downtown Boston, to the office of the one man Patricia feared more than poverty. Dante. Dante was Neil's brother-in-law, married to Neil's estranged younger sister. To the rest of the world, he was a brilliant federal prosecutor with a conviction rate that made defense attorneys sweat. To Patricia, he was simply the interloper, the stain on her pristine lineage. I remembered the first time I met him at a family Thanksgiving 5 years ago. He had just been promoted to the U.S. Attorney's Office, a massive achievement. Patricia had not congratulated him. Instead, she had looked at his new luxury sedan parked in her driveway and asked him to move it around the back because the neighbors might think the help had parked in the wrong spot. That was Patricia. She did not just dislike Dante because he was loud or opinionated. She despised him because he was a black man who had more power than her entire fading dynasty combined. She hated that he didn't need her money. She hated that he saw right through her carefully constructed facade of benevolence. Every time he looked at her across the dinner table, his eyes were sharp, analytical, dissecting her lies before she even spoke them. He called her the viper behind her back. And right now, I needed a viper to fight a snake. I glanced at Lily in the rearview mirror. She was still clutching that cursed doll, her eyes wide with trauma. Patricia had counted on me going to the local police. She knew the chief of police in our suburb. They played golf at the same country club. She likely donated to his re-election campaign. If I had stopped for that trooper, I would be in a holding cell right now, processing for possession with intent to distribute, while Patricia swept in like a savior to take Lily into emergency custody. She would paint me as the unstable, drug-addled mother, and she would win. But Dante was federal. His jurisdiction superseded the local nepotism Patricia relied on. He dealt with organized crime, with massive fraud, with monsters far worse than a bitter mother-in-law. More importantly, he had been waiting for this. I remembered a conversation we had a year ago out on the porch while Patricia berated the catering staff inside. Dante had taken a sip of his bourbon and told me that Patricia was playing a dangerous game with her finances, that she was desperate. He had warned me then to watch my back. I hadn't listened. I had thought he was just being cynical. I was not cynical anymore. I was desperate. The trees thinned out, revealing the gray skyline of the city. I was bringing Dante the smoking gun he needed. I was bringing him the drugs, the cash, and the witness. I was about to hand him the weapon to destroy the woman who had tormented him for a decade. I pressed down harder on the accelerator. The engine roared, a sound of defiance. I was not going to be the victim today. I was going to be the informant. And God help Patricia when Dante saw what she had done to a 6-year-old girl. I screeched into the underground parking garage of the federal building, my tires squealing against the concrete. Dante had cleared my license plate with security just seconds before I arrived, and I didn't breathe until the heavy steel gate clanged shut behind me, blocking out the world and the state troopers. The sudden silence of the garage was jarring after the chaos of the drive. I saw him immediately. Dante was standing by the elevator bank, looking like a statue carved out of justice itself. He wore an immaculate navy suit that cost more than my car. His arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. I threw the car into park and scrambled out my legs feeling like jelly. Dante didn't wait for me to speak. He strode toward the car, his eyes scanning the perimeter of the garage as if expecting an ambush. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice low and commanding. "She is in the back seat," I gasped, pointing a trembling finger at the car. "Lily is terrified, Dante. But you have to look in the trunk first. You have to see it before you judge me." Dante nodded, signaling for me to pop the latch. As the trunk lid rose, revealing the spare tire well, I braced myself for his reaction. I expected shock. I expected him to ask me if I had lost my mind. I expected the judgment that everyone else in this family constantly heaped upon me. But Dante didn't flinch. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a pair of latex gloves, and snapped them on with practiced efficiency. He leaned over the trunk, inspecting the gallon bag of white crystals and the stack of rubber-banded cash. He didn't touch them yet. He just stared at them with a cold, grim satisfaction, as if he were looking at the final piece of a puzzle he had been solving for years. "Methamphetamine," he said, his voice flat. "High grade. Street value roughly $15,000. And the cash makes it look like distribution. She didn't just want you arrested for possession, Gwen. She wanted you buried under a mandatory minimum sentence." I slumped against the cold concrete wall, sliding down until I hit the floor. "She hates me," I sobbed, the adrenaline finally crashing. "She hates me because I'm not good enough for Neil. But why would she go this far? Why would she risk traumatizing Lily?" Dante peeled off the gloves and turned to look at me. His eyes were dark and furious. "It is not about hate, Gwen. It is about math. I have been waiting for this day for 6 months. I knew she would make a move, I just didn't know it would be this violent." He walked over and pulled me up to my feet, gripping my shoulders hard. "Patricia is not the wealthy matriarch she pretends to be. She is broke. She has been bleeding the estate dry for years. My sources in cybercrime confirmed it last week. Your mother-in-law has a gambling addiction. She plays high-stakes online poker on offshore servers. As of this morning, she owes the Irish mob over $500,000. She needs liquid cash, and she needs it now." I stared at him, my mouth falling open. The gambling, the secrecy, the way she constantly asked Neil for loans. She needs control of the family trust. Dante continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "The only thing standing between her and financial ruin is Lily's inheritance. If you go to prison for drug trafficking, she gets emergency custody. She gets the conservatorship. She gets the $2 million in Lily's trust fund to pay off her debts. She tried to sell your life to save her own skin." Dante ushered me into his office, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind us and cutting off the hum of the federal building. He wasted no time. He sat behind his desk and woke his computer, his fingers flying across the keyboard with the precision of a pianist. On the wall behind him, framed degrees and commendations stared down at me, a stark contrast to the criminal accusations currently hanging over my head. I hugged my arms around my chest, trying to stop the shivering that had nothing to do with the winter cold. "Come look at this," Dante said, gesturing to the monitor. I walked around the desk. The screen displayed a complex financial web, a series of accounts and transfers that looked like a foreign language to me. But the heading at the top was clear as day. It read, "The Lily Henderson Irrevocable Trust." "Your father was a smart man," Gwen, Dante said, tapping the screen. "When he passed away, he didn't trust Neil with money. He knew Neil was weak, so he bypassed him completely. He set up a $2 million trust fund for Lily, set to mature when she turns 18. But there is a clause for emergency access." I squinted at the legal jargon. "What kind of emergency access?" Dante highlighted a paragraph and read, "Custodial incapacitation. If the primary guardian, that is you, becomes legally unable to care for the child due to death, severe illness, or incarceration, the secondary guardian assumes control of the trust to cover the child's living expenses." The room spun. Incarceration. She did not just want me out of the way. I whispered, the realization making me nauseous. She needed me in prison. "Exactly," Dante confirmed. "If you are arrested for trafficking methamphetamine, you are automatically deemed unfit. You go to jail. Patricia files for emergency custody. And once she has Lily, she has the checkbook. She can drain that $2 million under the guise of legal fees, private schooling, and home renovations. By the time Lily turns 18, there would be nothing left but dust. But Neil, I stammered my denial, fighting a losing battle against the evidence. Neil is her father. He would never let her steal from his own daughter. Dante looked at me with pity. He clicked open a scanned document. It was a power of attorney form, dated 3 months ago. At the bottom in blue ink was a signature I knew better than my own. Neil. He already signed it away, Gwen. Dante's voice was gentle but unyielding. Neil granted his mother full executive power over Lily's assets in the event that he could not manage them. He handed her the keys to the vault before she even planted the drugs. I stared at my husband's signature, the loop of the L, the sharp cross of the T. It was a betrayal deeper than any affair. Neil hadn't just failed to protect us, he had signed the warrant. He had traded his daughter's future to keep his mother happy. The tears that had been threatening to fall suddenly evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard rage. She is not going to get a dime, I said, my voice steady for the first time all morning. No, she is not. Dante agreed, standing up and buttoning his jacket. Because we are going to make sure that by the end of the day, the only person in handcuffs is the woman who thought she could outsmart the federal government. But we have to move fast. My phone is about to ring, and it is going to be your local chief of police. My phone began to vibrate against the mahogany desk, the buzzing sound echoing like a drill in the silent office. The screen lit up with a name that made my stomach drop. Chief O'Malley. He was the head of the local police department in our suburb, a man who had spent every Sunday for the last 20 years playing golf with my late father-in-law. He had been at my wedding. He had held Lily when she was a baby. Now he was hunting me. Answer it, Dante commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. Put it on speaker. I tapped the green icon with a trembling finger. Before I could even say hello, O'Malley's voice boomed through the room, thick with false authority and condescension. Gwendolyn, this has gone on long enough. We have your vehicle tracked on traffic cameras entering the downtown perimeter. You need to pull over immediately. We have officers en route to intercept. Do not make us escalate the situation in front of your daughter. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to scream that I was innocent, but no words came out. My throat felt like it was closing up. O'Malley continued, his tone softening into that sickeningly paternal register Patricia used so well. Your mother-in-law is worried sick, Gwen. She told us about the relapse. We know you are not in your right mind. Just bring the girl to the station. We can keep this quiet. We do not need to involve child services if you just cooperate. That was the hook, keep it quiet. He was offering me a backroom deal to hand over my daughter and admit to a crime I didn't commit, all to protect the family reputation. Dante reached out and took the phone from the desk. He didn't shout. He didn't sound angry. He sounded lethal. Chief O'Malley, this is Dante Williams, Assistant United States Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. The kind of silence that happens when a bully realizes he just punched a wall of solid steel. Dante O'Malley stammered, his tone shifting instantly from aggression to uncertainty. I did not know she was with you. Look, this is a local matter, a domestic dispute. We have probable cause to believe she is in possession of narcotics and endangering a minor. You have probable cause based on a tip from a complainant with a documented financial motive to frame the suspect. Dante interrupted his words, clipping the air like scissors. And considering you have a personal relationship with said complainant, any action you take from this moment forward will be viewed as a violation of due process and potential obstruction of a federal inquiry. Federal inquiry, O'Malley sputtered. Since when is a traffic stop a federal case? Since I opened a file on this suspect 5 minutes ago, Dante lied smoothly. Mrs. Henderson is currently a cooperating witness in an ongoing investigation regarding interstate drug distribution. If your officers touch her car or intimidate my witness, I will personally see to it that your department undergoes a full Department of Justice audit. Do I make myself clear? The line crackled with static. I stared at Dante in awe. He had just turned my nightmare into a shield. We are coming in, Dante continued, looking straight at me. But we are not coming to your precinct, O'Malley. We are surrendering voluntarily to the county sheriff's department. We will meet you there in 20 minutes. If I see a single one of your cruisers before then, I am filing harassment charges. Dante tapped the red button ending the call. He looked at me, a grim smile touching the corner of his mouth. He is terrified. He knows if this goes to the county, he loses control of the narrative. Patricia can't buy the county sheriff. Get your things, Gwen. It is time to go face them. The county sheriff's station was a fortress of gray brick and glass, starkly different from the cozy red brick local precinct where Patricia held court like a queen. I pulled my car into the designated spot Dante had arranged. My hands were no longer shaking. The cold fury that had replaced my fear was a much better fuel. I unbuckled Lily, who was still clinging to the porcelain doll as if it were a shield. "Stay close to me," I told her, my voice steady. "No matter what Grandma says, you do not let go of my hand." Dante met us at the entrance. He didn't look like a brother-in-law anymore. He looked like a weapon in a suit. He nodded to me, a silent signal that it was time to walk into the lion's den. As the automatic doors slid open, the stale smell of coffee and floor wax hit me, followed immediately by a sound that made my skin crawl. It was Patricia's voice. Oh, thank God. "Officer, there she is." Patricia was standing at the front desk, flanked by two confused-looking deputies. She was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She had somehow managed to make herself look frail, clutching a handkerchief, her shoulders hunched in feigned distress. When she saw us, she let out a theatrical gasp and rushed forward, ignoring me completely and aiming straight for Lily. "Come to Grandma, sweetheart," she cooed, her voice dripping with poisonous sweetness. "You are safe now. Come here, let Grandma hold you." She reached out, her manicured claws extending toward my daughter. In any other reality, I might have hesitated. I might have been too polite, too conditioned to respect my elders. But not today. Today I saw her for what she was. A predator. I stepped in front of Lily, using my body as a human barricade. When Patricia's hand lunged for Lily's shoulder, I didn't just block it. I slapped her hand away, hard. The sound of skin hitting skin echoed through the cavernous lobby. "Do not touch her," I snarled, the volume of my voice surprising even me. "You will never touch my daughter again." Patricia recoiled as if I had shot her. She stumbled back, clutching her hand to her chest, her eyes widening in mock terror. She turned to the deputies, tears instantly springing to her eyes. "Did you see that? Did you see her strike me? She is violent. She is completely out of control." Patricia pointed a trembling finger at my face, her voice rising to a shriek that drew the attention of everyone in the room. "Look at her eyes. She is high as a kite. My son told me she has been using meth for months. She is trying to kidnap my granddaughter. Officer, please, you have to take the child away from her before she hurts someone. She has drugs in the car. I know she does." The deputies exchanged glances and started moving toward us, their hands hovering near their belts. The atmosphere in this room shifted instantly. To them, I was the erratic, disheveled woman screaming at a crying grandmother. Patricia's narrative was taking hold. She was winning. She looked at me with a split-second smirk hidden behind her handkerchief, a look that said, "I told you I would bury you." She expected me to scream. She expected me to fight the officers and prove her point that I was unstable. But she had made one critical error. She was so focused on destroying me that she hadn't noticed the man standing silently in my shadow. Dante stepped forward, moving smoothly between me and the advancing deputies. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Deputies, stand down." Dante said, his voice cutting through the hysteria like a razor blade. "Unless you want to explain to the United States Attorney why you are harassing a federal witness." The silence that followed Dante's entry was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely delicious. Patricia stopped her theatrical wailing mid-sob. Her hands, which had been reaching for my daughter, froze in the air. She stared at Dante as if she were looking at a ghost, or perhaps a monster she thought she had banished to the dark corners of her past. For years she had treated him like an unwanted accessory to her family, a charity case that her late husband had forced upon her. She had never respected him. She had never feared him. Until now. You, Patricia hissed. The veneer of the distraught grandmother vanished instantly, replaced by the snarling face of the bigot I knew all too well. Her posture rigidified, her eyes narrowing into hateful slits. "What are you doing here, boy?" She spat the word, dripping with a venomous racial subtext that was impossible to miss. "I told Neil to keep you away from my affairs. You have no business in a respectable establishment. Get back to the gutter where you belong, you filthy little—" She let the slur hang in the air. It was a word so ugly, so archaic, that it seemed to physically darken the room. The reaction was instantaneous. The desk sergeant, a heavy-set man with graying hair who had been looking at me with suspicion just moments ago, stiffened. He looked from the impeccable man in the three-piece suit to the screeching woman in pearls, and his expression shifted from sympathy to disgust. The two deputies who had been flanking Patricia took a synchronized step away from her, as if her prejudice was contagious. Dante did not flinch. He did not look angry. He looked bored. He stood there with the relaxed confidence of a man holding a royal flush, while his opponent bet the deed to their house on a pair of twos. He reached into his breast pocket, his movement slow and deliberate, drawing every eye in the room. He pulled out a leather badge wallet and flipped it open. The gold shield of the Justice Department caught the overhead fluorescent lights, gleaming like a warning beacon. "Careful, Patricia," Dante said. His voice was smooth, low, and carried a weight that made the floorboards vibrate. "I would hate to add a federal hate crime enhancement to the laundry list of felonies you are already facing today." He turned his gaze to the desk sergeant, ignoring Patricia completely. "Sergeant, my name is Dante Williams. I am the Assistant United States Attorney for the District of Massachusetts. And as of this morning, I am the retained legal counsel for Mrs. Gwendolyn Henderson." The sergeant's eyes widened. He glanced at the badge, then at Dante, then at me. He straightened his spine, sensing that the tectonic plates of power in the room had just shifted violently. "I apologize, sir." The sergeant stammered, his hand instinctively going to his belt. "We were told this was a local narcotics dispute." "It is not a dispute," Dante corrected him, closing his wallet with a sharp snap. "It is a frame-up. And if you continue to allow this civilian to harass my client and use racial epithets in a government building, I will be forced to ask for your badge number as well." Patricia looked around, realizing too late that the tide had turned. The officers were no longer her protectors. They were staring at her like she was something they had stepped in. She tried to pivot, tried to summon the tears again, but her face was too twisted with rage to soften. "He is lying!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Dante. "He is a liar and a thief. He is just an adopted stray. He has no authority here." Dante took one step toward her. Just one. But it was enough to make her recoil against the reception desk. He loomed over her, his shadow swallowing her whole. "I have enough authority to prosecute you for filing a false police report attempting to frame a federal witness and child endangerment," Dante said, his voice dropping to a whisper that only we could hear. "So I suggest you sit down and shut up, mother, before I decide to petition the judge to deny you bail." "Welcome to my world, Patricia. You are not in the country club anymore." The automatic doors slid open with a mechanical hiss, shattering the tense standoff in the lobby. My husband rushed into the station, his designer wool coat unbuttoned and his face flushed from running. Neil looked frantic, the kind of panic I had only seen on his face when he lost a major client file or forgot an anniversary. But this was not about a file. This was about his carefully constructed world falling apart. I instinctively took a small step forward, a reflex born of 10 years of marriage, waiting for him to embrace me, to ask if Lily was safe, to demand answers about the drugs found in my car. But Neil did not look at me. He did not look at his 6-year-old daughter, who was hiding behind my legs, clutching her doll in terror. His eyes went straight to Patricia, who was slumped against the reception desk, feigning a fainting spell with the dramatic flair of a silent film actress. "Mom?" he gasped, ignoring us completely as he rushed to her side. He dropped to his knees, taking her hands in his. "Mom, are you okay? Did they hurt you?" I felt something inside my chest snap. It was a quiet sound like a dry twig breaking in a winter forest, but it signaled the absolute, irreversible death of my marriage. The man I had shared a bed with for a decade had just walked into a police station where his wife and child were reporting a felony, and his first instinct was to comfort the perpetrator. Patricia looked at him with watery eyes, pointing a trembling finger at Dante. "They are attacking me, Neil," she sobbed, squeezing his hand. "Gwen brought him here. She brought that man to intimidate me. She is out of control." Neil stood up and spun around to face me, his face twisted in a snarl I had never seen before. It was a look of pure, unadulterated resentment. "What is wrong with you, Gwen?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the sterile tile walls. "Why is he here?" He pointed at Dante with a mixture of fear and disgust, unable to even say his name. "This is a family matter," Neil hissed, stepping closer to me, invading my personal space. "We could have handled this at home. We could have gotten you help for your problem, but instead you drag an outsider into this. You bring him here to humiliate my mother in public. Have you lost your mind?" Outsider. The word hung in the air, heavy and ugly. It was the same word Patricia used. It was the code they used to remind Dante that no matter how successful he was, no matter that he was married to Neil's sister, he would never be one of them. Neil had chosen his side. He wasn't a husband or a father anymore. He was just Patricia's son. I looked at Neil, really looked at him, and realized I was looking at a stranger. "I did not bring an outsider, Neil," I said, my voice ice cold. "I brought a federal prosecutor, and I did not bring him to humiliate your mother. I brought him because she put methamphetamine in my trunk and tried to send me to prison so she could steal Lily's trust fund." Neil blinked, the accusation bouncing off his thick skull. He shook his head, his denial absolute. "Stop it, Gwen. Just stop lying. Mom told me everything. She told me you have been spiraling. We are trying to save you." Dante stepped forward, blocking Neil's path to me with his shoulder. He didn't look angry. He looked disappointed. "She is not spiraling," Neil, Dante said calmly. "But you are about to. Because unless you step away from your mother right now, I am going to add you to the list of co-conspirators. Look at the evidence, Neil. Or are you too blind to see that she is selling your wife to pay her gambling debts?" Dante did not scream back. He did not engage in the shouting match Neil was desperately trying to provoke. Instead, he reached into his leather attaché case with a calm, terrifying precision. He pulled out a thick manila envelope and slammed it onto the sergeant's desk. The sound cracked through the lobby like a gunshot, silencing Neil mid-sentence. "Do not take my word for it, Neil," Dante said, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated with suppressed rage. "Read it yourself. Read how much your mother loves you." Neil looked at the envelope, then at his mother. Patricia's eyes widened in genuine panic for the first time. She lunged forward, her claw-like hands grasping for the papers. "Do not touch that," she shrieked. "It is private. It is none of your business." But Dante was faster. He blocked her with a stiff arm and shoved the photos into Neil's chest. Neil instinctively grabbed them. He looked down. The top page was a high-resolution screenshot of a text message conversation. The timestamp was from last night at 2 a.m. I watched my husband's face as he read. At first there was confusion, then a furrow of the brow, and finally the color drained from his skin so completely that I thought he might faint. His hands began to shake, rattling the papers. "What is this?" Neil whispered, his voice cracking. "Mom, what is this?" "Read it out loud," Dante commanded. "Read it so the officers can hear exactly why they should be arresting her instead of your wife." Neil swallowed hard. He looked like a man reading his own death warrant. He read the text message, his voice trembling. "Package secured. It is in the spare tire well. She picks up the brat at 7. Make sure the anonymous tip is called in by 8. I want her in custody before she gets to work." Neil looked up, tears pooling in his eyes. He flipped to the next page, and this one Dante pressed. "Read the reply from your mother's bookie." "Payment received. Mrs. Henderson." Neil read, "Your debt is cleared once the trust fund transfer is authorized. Pleasure doing business." The silence in the police station was absolute. The desk sergeant was leaning over the counter, his mouth slightly open. The deputies looked at Patricia with open disgust. The image of the grieving, concerned grandmother had dissolved. In her place stood a desperate addict who had bartered her own grandchild's safety to settle a gambling tab. "You did this," Neil whispered, staring at his mother as if he had never seen her before. "You called her the brat. You planted drugs in Gwen's car." Patricia's face contorted. The mask fell away completely. She didn't look sorry. She looked cornered. "I did it for us," she hissed, her voice low and ugly. "We are drowning, Neil. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. I have nothing left. That woman has money sitting in a trust fund doing nothing. I just needed to borrow it." "You were going to send Gwen to prison for 20 years!" Neil shouted, the papers falling from his hands and scattering across the floor. "You were going to leave Lily without a mother just to pay off a bookie." Patricia straightened her pearls, her chin lifting in a defiant, aristocratic sneer that looked grotesque under the fluorescent lights. "Better she goes to prison than we go to the poorhouse, Neil. Grow up." Someone had to make the hard choice. You were never strong enough to do what was necessary. I watched the man I loved crumble. He backed away from her, revulsion written on every feature of his face. He looked at me, then at Lily, and finally back at the monster who raised him. The umbilical cord that had strangled our marriage for a decade had finally violently been cut. While the lobby of the police station felt like a battlefield, the small interview room down the hall was terrifyingly quiet. I stood behind the one-way mirror, my arms wrapped tight around my chest, watching a woman from Child Protective Services speak to my daughter. Her name was Ms. Hernandez, and she spoke with a softness that made my heart ache. Lily sat at the small round table, her feet barely touching the floor, still clutching the porcelain doll Patricia had given her. Ms. Hernandez pushed a coloring book aside and leaned forward gently. "I need you to be brave for me one more time, Lily. You mentioned that Grandma wanted to play a game with the bag in the car. Can you tell me exactly what happened before she put the bag in the trunk?" Lily looked down at her doll, her small fingers tracing the lace on its dress. "She told me we were playing bakery. She said the white stuff was special sugar for a wedding cake she was making for a friend. But she said we could not bake in the kitchen because it was a secret surprise." I watched Ms. Hernandez take a note. Her face remained neutral, but I saw her jaw tighten. "And did you touch the special sugar, Lily?" Lily shook her head vigorously. "No. Grandma said I was not allowed to touch it with my bare skin. She said the sugar was magic, and if I touched it, the magic would disappear. So she made me wear the costume." Ms. Hernandez paused, her pen hovering over the paper. "What costume, sweetie?" "The doctor costume," Lily whispered. She went to the cabinet under the sink and got the box of blue hands. The rubber ones that snap when you put them on. She made me put them on both hands. She said I looked like a real surgeon. Then she let me hold the bag while she opened the back of Mommy's car. I felt the blood drain from my face so fast I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. Blue nitrile gloves. Patricia hadn't just used my daughter to transport drugs, she had used her to package them. The gloves weren't a game. They were a forensic countermeasure. Patricia knew that if the bag was found, the first thing the police would do is dust for prints. If Lily's small fingerprints were found on the bag, it could be argued as an accident, a child getting into something she shouldn't have. But by forcing her to wear medical gloves, Patricia had ensured two things. First, there would be no accidental prints to muddy the waters. Second, and far more sinister, she had involved Lily in the actual handling of the narcotics while protecting herself from residue. Ms. Hernandez looked up at the mirror. She couldn't see me, but she looked straight into my eyes with a grim, devastating understanding. She knew what this meant. This was no longer just a custody dispute or a possession charge. This was the calculated use of a minor to facilitate a felony. "Did Grandma wear gloves too?" Ms. Hernandez asked softly. Lily nodded. "Yes. She wore the blue ones too. She said we were a team. She told me to be very careful not to make a hole in the bag, or the police would come and take you away." That was the final nail. Patricia had terrified a 6-year-old into silence while actively directing her to handle a Class A substance. I looked at the audio recorder spinning on the table. That confession was not just evidence. It was a life sentence. Patricia had not just tried to frame me. She had endangered the life of her own grandchild in a way that no judge, no jury, and certainly no son could ever forgive. I turned away from the glass, seeing Neil standing in the doorway behind me. He had heard everything, and for the first time he wasn't looking at me with anger. He was looking at the floor, weeping silently. Patricia did not scream. She did not throw herself on the floor or beg for forgiveness. Instead, she did something far more terrifying. She straightened her back, smoothed the front of her Chanel suit, and pulled her smartphone from her purse with a calm, practiced motion. The mask of the distraught grandmother was gone, replaced by the cold calculation of a woman who had spent 40 years manipulating Boston's social elite. She tapped out a quick message, hit send, and then looked at me. It was not a look of defeat. It was a look of pure, unadulterated malice. "You think this is over because you have a badge and a few text messages?" she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that chilled me to the bone. "You forget who I am, Gwendolyn. The law is slow. The internet is instant." I didn't know what she meant until 5 minutes later. We were standing by the sergeant's desk, Dante finalizing the protective order, when my pocket began to vibrate. It wasn't just a text. It was a barrage. My phone lit up with notification after notification, a continuous stream of buzzing that drew everyone's attention. Then Neil's phone started ringing, then Dante's. I pulled my phone out. The screen was filled with alerts from every social media platform I had, plus 3 voicemails from my partners at the architecture firm. My hands shook as I unlocked the screen and opened the link that my managing director had just texted me with the caption, "Gwen, tell me this isn't true." The headline from the Boston Chronicle's breaking news feed screamed at me in bold black letters. "Prominent local architect investigated for narcotics trafficking and child endangerment." I clicked the article, my breath hitching in my throat. There was a photo of me taken from a bad angle at a charity gala years ago, where I looked tired and flushed, placed next to a saintly, soft-lit portrait of Patricia. The article was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed that a concerned family member had requested a wellness check after finding drugs in my vehicle, and that I had fled the scene with my daughter to avoid police intervention. It painted Patricia as the hero trying to save her granddaughter from a spiraling addict. "Oh my God," I whispered, showing the screen to Dante. She tipped off the press. She must have had this written and ready to go before she even planted the drugs. Neil looked over my shoulder, reading the comments that were already pouring in below the article. They were vicious. "Horrible mother. Lock her up. Save that poor little girl." People who didn't know me, people who had never met me, were judging me based on a lie fabricated by a woman standing 10 feet away. "This is what she does," Neil said, his voice hollow. "She destroys reputations. She knew if the legal route failed, she could still ruin your career." "Gwen, the firm is tagged in this." Patricia stood by the water cooler, watching us read the destruction she had unleashed. She didn't say a word. She just raised her eyebrows slightly, a silent challenge. She had turned the court of public opinion against me in the span of a heartbeat. I looked at Dante, panic rising in my chest. I could win the legal battle, but how could I ever get my life back if the whole world thought I was a monster? Dante snatched the phone from my hand and looked at the article. He didn't look worried. He looked energized. "She just made a fatal mistake," he said, turning to face Patricia. "She just published libel, and by leaking details of an active federal investigation to the press, she just waived her right to silence. She wanted a media circus. Fine, I am going to give her a show she will never forget." The digital assault was faster and more brutal than anything the legal system could produce. Within 10 minutes of Patricia's leak, my phone had become a radioactive brick in my hand. It vibrated incessantly, a constant buzzing reminder that my life was being dismantled in real time. I looked down at the screen. A notification from my firm's human resources director popped up. It was marked urgent. I didn't want to open it, but I had to. The email was brief, cold, and legally bulletproof. "Due to the serious nature of the criminal allegations and the resulting adverse publicity, you are placed on unpaid administrative leave effective immediately. We request that you do not contact clients or enter the premises until further notice." I dropped the phone on the bench next to me. 12 years. 12 years of 70-hour weeks of missing anniversaries of building that firm's reputation from the ground up. Gone. Erased by a single lie told by a woman who had never worked a day in her life. It wasn't just the job. My personal notifications were a dumpster fire. The neighborhood Facebook group, usually reserved for complaints about trash pickup, had turned into a tribunal. I saw comments from women I had hosted for book club. I always knew she was unstable. I feel so sorry for Neil. I hope they keep that child away from her. The judgment was swift, absolute, and suffocating. I felt like I was standing naked in the middle of a crowded stadium with everyone pointing and laughing. I can't do this, I whispered, the fight draining out of me like water from a cracked glass. I sank onto the hard plastic bench, burying my face in my hands. Dante, look at this. They already convicted me. My career is dead. My neighbors think I am a monster. Maybe I should just let her have custody. Maybe if I surrender, she will stop. I was ready to fold. The shame was too heavy. But then I felt a hand on my shoulder. It wasn't comforting. It was firm, bordering on painful. Dante gripped me and forced me to look up at him. His eyes were blazing with an intensity that burned through my self-pity. "Do not you dare," Dante said, his voice low and fierce. "Do not you dare let her win this. This is exactly what she wants, Gwen. This is the strategy. She knows she can't beat you on the facts, so she is trying to break your spirit. She wants you to feel so small, so dirty, that you hand over your daughter just to make the pain stop." He pointed at the phone on the bench. "That is noise, Gwen. That is just noise. Your boss is a coward and your neighbors are sheep, but none of them are the judge. None of them get to decide if you keep your daughter. If you give up now, if you show 1 ounce of weakness, you don't just lose your job. You lose Lily. You lose her to the woman who put gloves on her hands and forced her to hold methamphetamine. Is that what you want? Do you want Lily to be raised by the monster who did this?" I looked at Lily, who was sitting quietly with Neil, oblivious to the fact that her mother was falling apart. I thought about Patricia's cold, winking face. I thought about the gloves. "No," I whispered, the spark returning. "Then stand up," Dante commanded, pulling me to my feet. "Wipe your face. We are going to walk out of here with your head high. This isn't a legal battle anymore, Gwen. This is a war, and we have not even fired our biggest gun yet. We are going to find that camera footage and we are going to bury her." While Dante was rallying my spirit in the police station, my husband was driving across the city with a singular destructive purpose. Neil did not go to work. He did not go to a bar. He drove straight to the townhouse on Beacon Hill. He told me later that the drive felt like an out-of-body experience. The radio was off. The heat was off. The only sound was the blood rushing in his ears and the memory of his mother's voice calling his daughter a brat. He parked his car half on the sidewalk, not caring about the ticket, and stormed up the granite steps. He didn't use his key. He pounded on the heavy oak door until the wood groaned. When no one answered, he remembered the hidden key under the planter, a secret he had kept since high school. He unlocked the door and was immediately hit by a smell that didn't belong in the pristine, lemon-scented air of his mother's home. It was the smell of burning paper and chemical ink. It was coming from the library. Neil ran down the hallway, his footsteps echoing on the marble. He burst into the room to find Patricia on her knees in front of the fireplace. The gas logs were roaring, and she was frantically feeding handfuls of documents into the flames. Neil rushed forward and grabbed her wrist, yanking her hand back. A half-burned piece of paper fluttered to the Persian rug. He stomped on the embers and picked it up. It was a foreclosure notice from the bank. Next to it was a threatening letter from a loan shark based in Macau. The numbers were staggering. She wasn't just in debt, she was underwater. "What are you doing?" Neil screamed, waving the charred paper in her face. "You told me the house was paid off. You told me Dad left us millions." Patricia scrambled to her feet, her face smeared with soot, her hair wild. She didn't look like the matriarch anymore. She looked like a cornered animal. "I am fixing it," she yelled back, trying to snatch the paper from him. "I am cleaning up the mess. I did what I had to do to keep a roof over your head." "You framed my wife," Neil shouted, his voice breaking. "You put drugs in my car. You used Lily. You destroyed Gwen's career. And for what? For this drafty museum of a house. For your image. Patricia's face twisted into a mask of pure venom. She stepped forward and slapped him. The sound was loud, sharp, and violent. It was the slap she used to give him when he was a child, the one meant to demand total submission. "You are useless," she spat, her eyes bulging. "You are a weak, pathetic man, just like your father. If you made enough money, I wouldn't have to resort to this. I did this to save us because you are too incompetent to provide for this family. You let that woman control the money. You let her keep the trust fund locked away while I drown. I am the victim here, Neil. I am the one making the hard choices while you play house." Neil stood there, his cheeks stinging, staring at the woman he had spent his entire life trying to please. The slap didn't break him. It woke him up. He looked at the fire consuming the lies she had told for years. He looked at the foreclosure notice, and then he looked at her. "You didn't do this for the family," Neil said, his voice deadly quiet. "You did it for yourself. And you are right about one thing, Mother. I was weak. I was weak because I let you stay in my life." He backed away toward the door. Patricia's anger instantly morphed into panic. She realized she had gone too far. "Where are you going?" she cried, reaching out for him. "Neil, do not leave me. The police will be here soon. I need you to tell them it was Gwen. You have to help me." Neil stopped at the threshold. He didn't turn back. "I am going back to my wife," he said, "and I am going to tell the police exactly what I saw in this fireplace. You are on your own, Patricia." He walked out of the house, leaving the front door wide open, letting the cold winter air rush in to extinguish the warmth of the home he was leaving forever. The digital mob was still tearing my reputation apart online, but in the real world, Dante and I were driving back toward the source of the infection. We were not going to Patricia's house, though. We were heading to the Limestone Manor directly across the street, home to Mr. Arthur Abernathy. If there was one person in Boston who hated Patricia more than I did at this moment, it was Arthur. They had been engaged in a bitter feud for a decade over a property line dispute involving a historic oak tree. Patricia had sued him 3 times. Arthur, a retired naval officer with too much time and money, had responded by turning his home into a fortress of surveillance. Dante pulled the car to the curb, keeping the engine running. He pointed up at the eaves of Arthur's roof. There, blinking with a steady red light, was a high-definition security camera. It was angled perfectly. It didn't just cover Arthur's front yard. It had a direct, unobstructed line of sight into Patricia's driveway and the street parking where I had left my car the night before. We walked up the steps and rang the bell. I expected resistance. I expected to have to plead my case. But when the heavy door swung open, Arthur was already standing there, a grim smile on his weathered face. He was holding a scotch in one hand and a flash drive in the other. He had seen the news. He had seen the police at Patricia's house earlier. And being a man who watched his monitors religiously, he knew exactly what had happened. "I was wondering when you would show up," Arthur rumbled, stepping aside to let us into his foyer. "I saw the news report. Narcotics trafficking. That is a bold move even for her." "Mr. Abernathy." Dante began stepping into his official prosecutor persona. "We are looking for footage from last night between the hours of 2 and 3 in the morning. We believe your system might have captured evidence of a federal crime." Arthur laughed, a dry barking sound. He led us into his study, which looked more like a security control room. A wall of monitors displayed every angle of the street. He sat down at the main console and plugged in the drive. "I did not just capture it, son. I watched it live. I suffer from insomnia. I saw the whole thing. I saw her waddle out in her silk robe like a thief in the night." He clicked a file dated from the previous night. The large screen flickered to life. The image was crystal clear, illuminated by the street lamps. There was my car parked right where I left it, and there was Patricia. She was looking over her shoulder, clutching a heavy plastic bag. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. I watched in silence as the woman who had accused me of being a junkie fumbled with my trunk latch. I saw her open it. I saw her lift the carpet. And clear as day, I saw her wedge the bag of drugs and the cash into the spare tire well. She closed the trunk, wiped the handle with the hem of her robe, and scurried back across the street. Arthur leaned back, taking a sip of his scotch. I saved a backup copy to the cloud just in case she tries to hire someone to burn my house down again. It is all yours, Gwen. Nail her to the wall. I took the flash drive from his hand. It felt light, insignificant almost, but it was the heaviest weapon I had ever held. This was not just an alibi. This was a video confession. Patricia hadn't just framed me. She had performed a federal felony on camera, orchestrated by her own neighbor. I looked at Dante. The tightness around his eyes had vanished, replaced by the thrill of the hunt. "We have her," Dante said quietly. "We have everything. Now let's go introduce this little movie to the judge." The large monitor hummed in the quiet study, casting a blue glow over our faces. Arthur Abernathy sat back in his leather armchair, swirling his scotch, looking like a general who had just won a war without firing a single shot. Dante and I stood shoulder to shoulder, our eyes glued to the screen. The timestamp in the corner of the video feed read 02:14 a.m. The street was dark, lit only by the amber glow of the street lamps, but Arthur's camera was military grade. It did not just show shadows, it showed the truth in high definition. On screen, the front door of the townhouse opened. Patricia stepped out. She was not wearing her usual armored plating of a Chanel suit. She was wearing a silk floral robe and slippers. She looked around nervously, her head snapping left and right like a thief checking for witnesses. In her hand, she clutched the heavy gallon-sized plastic bag. It was unmistakable. I watched as she scurried across the pavement to my car. She did not fumble with keys. She used the spare fob she had sworn to me she lost 3 years ago. She popped the trunk. The camera angle was perfect, looking right down into the cargo space from the second-story elevation. We watched her lift the carpet liner. We watched her struggle to unscrew the wing nut of the spare tire. She was frantic, her movements jerky and desperate. She shoved the bag of methamphetamine and the cash into the well, then slammed the trunk shut. She paused for a moment, wiping the latch with the sleeve of her robe before running back into the safety of her home. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence in the room was heavy, but it was not the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of a guillotine blade waiting to drop. Dante let out a long breath, a sound of pure professional satisfaction. He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "That is not just possession," he said quietly. "That is conspiracy. That is filing a false report. That is perjury waiting to happen. Gwen, do you realize what we have here? She did not just frame you, she documented it. She handed us a conviction on a silver platter." Arthur handed the flash drive to Dante. "Give her hell, son," the old man said, raising his glass in a toast. "I have been waiting 10 years to see that woman get what she deserves." I looked at the black screen, seeing my reflection. The terrified woman who had cried in the police station was gone. The architect who worried about what the neighbors thought was gone. In her place was a mother who had just been handed the sword she needed to sever the head of the beast. I thought about the gloves on Lily's hands. I thought about the foreclosure notice Neil had found in the fireplace. I thought about the years of insults, the gaslighting, the way she made me feel small in my own life. It all ended tomorrow. I walked to the window, looking across the street at the dark windows of Patricia's townhouse. She was probably in there right now, drinking wine, thinking she had won. She thought I was crying somewhere in a holding cell, broken and defeated. She had no idea that the axe was already swinging. I turned back to Dante, a cold smile spreading across my face. "File the motion, Dante." I said, my voice steady and hard as stone. "We are not just going to defend me, we are going to bury her. Tomorrow she is dead." The air in the family court hearing room was stagnant and smelled of lemon polish and despair. It was an emergency session convened less than 24 hours after the incident, a testament to how quickly money can move the wheels of justice. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands clasped so tightly together that my knuckles were white. Beside me, Dante sat like a stone statue, his eyes fixed on the opposing counsel. He had told me to remain silent. He had told me to let them talk. He said the more rope we gave them, the tighter the noose would be when they eventually hung themselves. Patricia sat across the aisle, looking like the picture of grieving aristocracy. She wore a modest black dress and a single strand of pearls dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Next to her was Mr. Sterling, a lawyer whose billboard I had seen on the highway. He was expensive, aggressive, and known for destroying opponents in divorce cases. Patricia must have burned through the last of her loan shark money to hire him for the morning. Sterling stood up, buttoning his Italian suit jacket. He did not walk to the podium. He strutted. He looked at the judge, a tired man named Judge Holloway, and began his opening statement with the theatrical flair of a man earning $500 an hour. Your Honor, we are here today because a tragedy was narrowly averted. My client, Mrs. Patricia Henderson, is a pillar of this community. She is a grandmother who has spent the last decade watching her daughter-in-law slowly unravel. We are not just talking about a lapse in judgment. We are talking about 50 grams of methamphetamine found in a vehicle used to transport a 6-year-old child. He turned and pointed a manicured finger at me. I flinched, but Dante's knee touched mine under the table, a silent command to hold my ground. This woman, Sterling continued, his voice dripping with disdain, has a history of instability. She left home at 18, abandoning her own family. She works a low-income job as a landscape architect, earning a fraction of what is required to maintain the lifestyle her daughter is accustomed to. She is financially precarious, Your Honor. And as we know, financial desperation often leads to desperate illegal acts. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. The audacity was breathtaking. He was projecting Patricia's crimes onto me. He was painting me as the broke, desperate criminal, while the woman sitting behind him was the one drowning in gambling debt. Sterling paced back and forth, building his narrative brick by brick. We have statements from the local police chief regarding the defendant's erratic behavior. We have the grandmother's testimony. We request immediate full custody be awarded to Mrs. Henderson, along with control over the child's trust fund, to ensure those assets are not squandered on narcotics. We must protect this child from a mother who sees her not as a daughter but as a drug mule. Judge Holloway looked at me over his spectacles. His expression was severe. He was buying it. Why wouldn't he? On paper, without the context of the last 12 hours, I looked like a disaster. Patricia looked down at her hands, but I caught the tiny, triumphant quirk of her lips. She thought it was over. She thought she had won. She had no idea that the man sitting next to me was about to turn this courtroom into a slaughterhouse. Dante cleared his throat, the sound sharp and deliberate in the quiet room. He stood up, buttoning his jacket, and looked at the judge with a terrifying calmness. Your Honor, Dante said, his voice smooth as silk. Before you rule on the character of my client, the defense would like to call its first witness. The courtroom doors swung open with a heavy thud that seemed to echo the sudden drop in Patricia's confidence. Sterling was still buttoning his jacket, looking smug, when Dante dropped the name like a bomb in the center of the room. The defense calls Maria Santos. Patricia froze. Her knuckles turned white on the oak table. She knew exactly who walked through those double doors, but she clearly never expected to see her again. Maria was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, clutching her purse with trembling hands. She had been Patricia's housekeeper for 6 years, the silent shadow who polished the silver and ironed the sheets. Patricia had fired her yesterday morning, thinking that a severance check and a threat would be enough to buy her silence. She was wrong. Maria took the stand, refusing to look at Patricia, who was now staring daggers into the side of her head. Dante approached the witness box gently, his demeanor shifting from the shark he was with Sterling to a protector. Mrs. Santos, Dante began, his voice echoing in the silent room. You were employed by Mrs. Patricia Henderson until yesterday, is that correct? Yes, sir, Maria whispered. And can you tell the court what happened yesterday morning at 8 a.m.? Maria took a deep breath. She called me into the library. She gave me an envelope with cash. She told me I was fired immediately. She said I had to leave the house right then. She said if I ever told anyone about the shopping list, she would call immigration and have me deported. Judge Holloway leaned forward, his eyebrows knitting together. The mention of deportation threats shifted the atmosphere from civil dispute to something far uglier. Let us talk about that shopping list, Dante pressed. What did Mrs. Henderson ask you to buy the evening before the drugs were found in my client's car? Maria pulled a crumpled receipt from her pocket. Her hand shook as she smoothed it out on the railing. She made me go to the 24-hour pharmacy. She needed a box of nitrile medical gloves, specifically the blue ones, and she needed a box of gallon-sized freezer bags with the double seal. She was very angry. She said it was an emergency. And did Mrs. Henderson bake anything that night? Dante asked. Did she use those bags for food storage? Maria shook her head. No. Mrs. Henderson never cooks. The kitchen was spotless when I left. So she sent you to buy medical gloves and drug packaging materials in the middle of the night, fired you the next morning, and threatened you with deportation to ensure your silence. Objection! Sterling shouted, jumping to his feet. This is hearsay and speculation. It is not speculation. Maria suddenly spoke up, her voice gaining strength. She looked directly at the judge. She told me she was going to fix the family problem. She said she had to get her hands dirty, but she didn't want to leave any prints. Patricia slammed her hand on the table, unable to contain herself. You ungrateful little peasant. I paid you to keep your mouth shut. The courtroom gasped. Sterling squeezed his eyes shut, knowing his client had just hammered the first nail into her own coffin. Patricia realized her mistake instantly, covering her mouth with her hand, but the words were already hanging in the air, toxic and undeniable. Judge Holloway looked at Patricia with a gaze that could freeze water. Sit down, Mrs. Henderson, the judge commanded. And Mr. Williams, continue. Dante turned back to me and winked. The foundation of lies was cracking, and we were just getting started. The gavel slammed down against the wooden block, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the courtroom, but Patricia did not flinch. She remained standing, her chest heaving, pointing a trembling finger at the small, terrified woman in the witness box. She is a thief! Patricia screamed, her voice losing its cultivated Atlantic accent and devolving into a shrill screech. I fired her because she was stealing my silver. She is lying to protect that ungrateful daughter-in-law of mine. Do not listen to a word she says. She is nothing but a disgruntled servant. Mrs. Henderson, sit down immediately. Judge Holloway roared, his face flushing red. Patricia turned her gaze to the judge, and for a moment the entire room held its breath. She did not look at him with fear or respect. She looked at him with the familiarity of a woman who had hosted him for Christmas dinner for 20 years. Do not you take that tone with me, Henry, she snapped. My husband sat on that bench for 30 years. He built this courthouse. Do not you dare treat me like a common criminal in my husband's house. This is a travesty. I am the victim here. Her lawyer, Mr. Sterling, looked like he wanted to vanish into the floorboards. He physically grabbed Patricia's arm and yanked her down into her chair. Sit down, Patricia, he hissed, his face pale. You are destroying us. Patricia smoothed the front of her dress, shaking off his hand with a look of utter disdain. She sat back, lifting her chin, and surveyed the room. She genuinely believed she was in the right. In her mind, the law was something that applied to other people, to people like Maria, or me, or Dante. It did not apply to a Henderson of Beacon Hill. She looked at the judge not with apology, but with disappointment, as if he were a rude guest at her dinner party. I watched her from across the aisle, and for the first time I didn't feel intimidated. I felt a strange sense of pity. She was drowning in her own delusion. She was so convinced of her own superiority that she couldn't see the walls closing in. She thought her name was a shield, but Dante was about to show her that it was just a target. Judge Holloway took a deep breath, removing his glasses and rubbing the bridge of his nose. He looked at Patricia with a mixture of anger and sadness. Mrs. Henderson, if you speak out of turn one more time, I will have the bailiff remove you from this courtroom, and I will continue these proceedings in your absence. Is that understood? Patricia gave a curt, dismissive nod, refusing to make eye contact. She turned her glare back to me, mouthing the word, monster. Dante stood up. He didn't look at Patricia. He didn't need to. She had just done more damage to her defense in 30 seconds than he could have done in an hour of cross-examination. He turned to the judge, his face an unreadable mask of professional calm. Your Honor, the defense thanks Mrs. Santos for her bravery. We have no further questions for this witness. However, we have one final piece of evidence to submit. A piece of evidence that will clarify exactly who is the monster in this room. The defense would like to play a video file obtained from the security system of Mr. Arthur Abernathy directly across the street from the plaintiff's residence. Patricia's head snapped up. The color drained from her face instantly, leaving her looking like a wax figure. She knew about the feud, she knew about the cameras, and she knew with terrifying certainty that her time had just run out. The projector screen descended from the ceiling with a low mechanical hum that sounded like a drum roll in the silent courtroom. Dante connected his laptop to the evidence console. He did not say a word. He did not need to hype up what we were about to see. He simply pressed the spacebar. The large screen flickered to life. The image was grainy at first, adjusting to the low light of the street, but within seconds, the high-definition lens of Arthur Abernathy's security system sharpened into focus. The timestamp in the top right corner read 02:14 a.m. The scene was the sidewalk in front of my townhouse, illuminated by the amber glow of the street lamps. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the front door of the Henderson residence opened. A figure stepped out. There was no mistaking who it was. Even in the monochrome footage, Patricia's posture was identifiable. She was wearing a long floral silk robe and house slippers. She paused on the top step, looking left then right, her head snapping back and forth with the nervous energy of a criminal. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. It was a sound I will never forget, the sound of 50 people realizing simultaneously that they had been lied to. On the screen, Patricia hurried down the steps. She moved quickly toward my sedan parked at the curb. We watched her pull a key fob from her robe pocket. The lights of my car flashed once as it unlocked. She moved to the trunk and popped the lid. I looked at the defense table. Mr. Sterling, the high-priced lawyer who had spent the last hour attacking my character, had stopped writing. He was staring at the screen, his pen hovering over his legal pad. Then slowly he capped the pen and closed his file folder. It was a subtle gesture, but in the legal world it was the equivalent of raising a white flag. He knew it was over. The video continued. Patricia leaned into the trunk. We watched her struggle with the carpet liner. We saw her lift it up, and then in agonizingly clear detail we saw her pull the gallon-sized bag from her pocket. The light from the street lamp caught the reflection of the plastic. She shoved it down into the spare tire well, followed by the stack of cash. She spent a few seconds rearranging the carpet, then slammed the trunk shut. She wiped the latch with her sleeve, looked around one last time, and scurried back into her house. Dante paused the video right at the moment she was wiping the latch. The image froze on her face, illuminated by the porch light. It was a face of pure, calculated malice. Dante turned to the jury box, then to the judge. The video speaks for itself, Your Honor. This was not a wellness check. This was a premeditated planting of evidence to facilitate a fraudulent custody claim. I looked at Patricia. She was staring at the frozen image of herself. Her mouth was slightly open. The color had drained from her face so completely that her rouge stood out like clown makeup. For the first time in her life, she could not argue her way out. She could not use her husband's name or her social standing. The camera did not care who her ancestors were. The camera only saw a woman committing a felony. Judge Holloway stared at the screen for a long time. When he finally looked down at Patricia, his expression was not one of judicial anger. It was one of profound personal betrayal. He had known this woman for 30 years. He had trusted her. And now he looked at her as if she were a stranger who had broken into his court. Patricia, the judge, said, his voice quiet and shaking with suppressed rage. Please tell me I did not just watch you plant methamphetamine in your daughter-in-law's car. Patricia tried to speak. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Sterling for help, but he was busy studying the grain of the wood on the table, distancing himself from the radioactive fallout of his own client. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely final. The golden grandmother of Beacon Hill had fallen. The video ended, leaving the courtroom in a silence so profound you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Patricia sat frozen, her eyes fixed on the blank screen where her own crime had just played out. She looked smaller now, the grandeur of her Chanel suit failing to hide the trembling of her hands. Mr. Sterling. Her attorney closed his eyes and rubbed his temples, distancing himself from the inevitable wreckage. But Dante was not finished. He knew that to truly bury her, we did not just need to prove she did it, we needed to prove why. He walked back to the defense table and picked up a thick stack of documents, holding them up like a weapon. Your Honor. Dante said, his voice cutting through the quiet. The video shows us the how. It shows us the mechanism of the crime. But the defense would now like to present the why. Because people like Patricia Henderson do not plant Class A narcotics in their daughter-in-law's car for sport. They do it for money. He handed the file to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. Dante turned to the gallery, making direct eye contact with Neil. Exhibit C contains the certified bank statements of Neil and Gwendolyn Henderson's joint savings account, as well as the personal investment accounts of the late Judge Henderson. As you can see, the joint savings account, which contained $50,000 intended for home repairs, was liquidated 4 days ago. The withdrawal slip bears the signature of Neil Henderson. Neil stood up in the gallery, his face pale. I never signed that, he shouted, his voice cracking. I never withdrew that money. Dante nodded. We know you did not, Neil, because the handwriting analysis included in Exhibit D confirms that the signature is a forgery. It matches the handwriting of Patricia Henderson perfectly. She stole $50,000 from her own son to pay the initial installment of her gambling debt. But that was just the appetizer. Dante walked closer to the plaintiff's table, looming over Patricia. $50,000 was not enough to cover the $500,000 she owes to offshore creditors. She needed a bigger payout. And that brings us to the motive for framing my client. He pulled a single sheet of paper from the folder and placed it on the overhead projector. It was a legal application for emergency conservatorship over the Lily Henderson Irrevocable Trust. This document was drafted 2 weeks ago, Dante explained. It petitions the court to grant Patricia Henderson full control over her granddaughter's $2 million trust fund in the event of the mother's incarceration. Note the date, Your Honor. She prepared the paperwork to steal the money 14 days before she planted the drugs. This was not a desperate act of a concerned grandmother. This was a calculated financial heist. She planned to send Gwendolyn to federal prison for 20 years just to use her granddaughter's inheritance as an ATM. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The judge flipped through the pages, his face darkening with every line he read. He looked at the forged signatures, the liquidation records, and the trust fund application. The image of the wealthy, benevolent matriarch dissolved completely, revealing the desperate, greedy addict beneath. Patricia looked up, her eyes wild, realizing the walls had not just closed in. They had crushed her. It was a loan, she whispered, her voice shaking. I was going to pay it back. I just needed liquidity. The judge looked down at her over his spectacles, and for the first time there was no pity in his eyes, only disgust. You forged your son's signature and tried to frame an innocent woman to cover your bad bets, the judge said, his voice low and dangerous. You did not want liquidity, Mrs. Henderson. You wanted a victim. Judge Holloway sat back in his high leather chair, the silence in the courtroom stretching out like a taut wire ready to snap. He took off his reading glasses and rubbed his eyes, a gesture of profound exhaustion. When he looked at Patricia again, the professional detachment of the judiciary was gone. In its place was the deep personal sorrow of a man watching a friend's legacy turn to ash. He looked at the portrait of the late Judge Henderson hanging on the back wall of the courtroom, then down at the woman who had just desecrated his memory. Patricia, the judge said, his voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the room. I sat on this bench with your husband for 15 years. I held your son when he was christened. I have broken bread at your table. Patricia sat up straighter, mistaking his nostalgia for mercy. Henry, please, she began, her voice trembling with a desperate hope. You know me. You know I would never intended for things to go this far. I was just trying to protect the family. The judge cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. Do not speak his name, he commanded. You did not protect this family. You cannibalized it. You took the law, the very thing your husband dedicated his life to, and you used it as a weapon to terrorize an innocent mother and a 6-year-old child. You forged documents. You planted evidence. You traumatized your own granddaughter to cover a gambling debt. He picked up his pen, the scratching sound loud in the hushed room as he signed the document before him. He looked up, his eyes hard as flint. Patricia, you are a disgrace. You are a disgrace to this court, and you are a disgrace to the name you bear. Patricia recoiled as if he had slapped her. Her mouth fell open, a gasp of pure shock escaping her lips. She looked around the room expecting someone to object, but even her high-priced lawyer, Mr. Sterling, was staring at the floor, refusing to meet her gaze. Judge Holloway handed the paper to the bailiff. "I am hereby revoking bail. Officer, take Mrs. Henderson into custody immediately. The charges are possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, filing of false police report, forgery, and felony child endangerment." "No!" Patricia shrieked, standing up so fast her chair tipped over. "You cannot do this, Henry. We are friends. You cannot send me to jail. I am Patricia Henderson." The bailiff, a burly man who had tolerated her arrogance all morning, moved in with swift efficiency. He did not handle her with the deference she was used to. He grabbed her wrists and pulled them behind her back. The metallic ratchet of the handcuffs echoed through the room, a sound that signaled the absolute end of her reign. "I am not your friend today, Mrs. Henderson," the judge said coldly. "Today I am the law. Get her out of my sight." Patricia began to struggle, her composure fracturing completely. She screamed at Neil, she screamed at the judge, she screamed at the world. But as the bailiff marched her toward the side door, her eyes locked on mine. There was no hate left in them, only the terrifying realization that she was no longer the queen of the chessboard. She was just a prisoner. The heavy door slammed shut behind her, cutting off her wails, and for the first time in months the air in the room felt clean. I looked at Dante, tears of relief finally spilling over. The nightmare was over. The monster was in a cage. The metallic click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It severed the air in the courtroom, marking the end of an era and the death of a dynasty. The bailiff, a man who had likely arrested hundreds of petty criminals, showed no hesitation in twisting the arms of a Beacon Hill matriarch behind her back. Patricia let out a sound that was half gasp, half snarl. She thrashed against his grip, her carefully coiffed hair coming loose, spilling over her face like a broken veil. "You cannot do this," she screamed, her voice cracking with hysteria. "I am Patricia Henderson. I built this city. Take your hands off me, you filth." The bailiff tightened his grip, forcing her toward the side exit. As she was dragged past the plaintiff's table, she dug her heels into the carpet, fighting for one last moment of control. She did not look at the judge or the lawyers. She locked her wild, bloodshot eyes on her son. Neil was standing by the railing, his face pale but composed. He was not crying anymore. He was watching the inevitable consequence of a lifetime of enabling. "Neil!" She shrieked the name tearing from her throat. "Do something! You ungrateful coward! I did everything for you. I sacrificed my life for you. And you let them chain me like a dog. You are dead to me. Do you hear me? You are a useless, unfilial traitor." Neil did not flinch. He did not step forward to comfort her. He did not offer to pay her bail. He simply stared at her, seeing the rot beneath the skin for the first time. When silence failed to move him, Patricia turned her venom on Dante. She lunged toward him, restrained only by the bailiff's heavy arm. "And you?" She spat, her face twisted into a mask of pure hate. "You think you won, you dirty little stray. You are nothing. You are just a mongrel playing dress-up in a suit. You will never be one of us. You will always be the trash my husband dragged in from the gutter." Dante did not even blink. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking at her with the cold detachment of an exterminator viewing a trapped rat. "I am the man who put you in prison," Patricia, Dante said calmly. "That is all I need to be." The bailiff shoved her through the heavy oak door. Her screams were cut off abruptly as the wood slammed into the frame, sealing her away. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy, ringing in our ears. It was over. The witch was dead. Neil turned his back on the door. He did not look at where his mother had gone. He walked straight to the bench where I was sitting with Lily. He dropped to his knees, disregarding his suit, and wrapped his arms around both of us. He buried his face in my neck, his body shaking with the release of 30 years of suffocation. "I am so sorry, Gwen," he sobbed, his voice muffled against my shoulder. "I am so sorry I did not see it sooner." I held him, feeling the wetness of his tears. Lily reached out and patted his head. her small hand offering a forgiveness he did not feel he deserved. We were battered. We were exhausted. But as I looked over Neil's shoulder at Dante, who was quietly packing his briefcase, I knew we were finally free. The house of cards had fallen, and we were the ones left standing in the rubble. The processing center at the Suffolk County Jail smelled of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and the sharp metallic tang of fear. For Patricia Henderson, a woman whose life had been scented with lavender and expensive French perfume, the air itself was an assault. She stood in front of a scarred metal counter, shivering in her silk slip. Her Chanel suit, the armor she had worn like a second skin for 40 years, lay in a heap in a plastic bin. Jewelry, the corrections officer barked. She was a thick-set woman with eyes that had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. All of it, in the tray. Patricia reached up, her fingers trembling, as she unclasped the string of South Sea pearls that had been a wedding gift from her late husband. They hit the gray plastic tray with a hollow rattle. Next came the diamond stud earrings, then the platinum watch. Finally, the wedding ring. As each item was stripped away, a piece of her identity vanished with it. Without the gold, without the silk, without the curated facade of the Beacon Hill matriarch, she was shrinking. She was becoming just another number in the system. Face the wall, the officer commanded. Squat and cough. The indignity was absolute. Patricia closed her eyes, tears of humiliation leaking out, cutting tracks through the foundation and powder that was beginning to cake on her aging skin. When she was finally allowed to dress, it was not in silk, but in a stiff, ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that smelled of harsh detergent. It hung loosely on her frame, erasing her figure, erasing her status. They led her to a holding cell, a small cage of cinder block and steel. There was a stainless steel toilet in the corner with no seat, and a thin mattress on a concrete slab. Patricia sat on the edge of the cot, refusing to touch the walls. She needed to fix this. She just needed to make a call. Surely this was all a misunderstanding that could be cleared up by the right people. She waited 3 hours before they allowed her access to the wall-mounted phone. Her hands shook as she dialed the number of Senator Whitmore, a man whose campaigns she had funded for 2 decades. A man who had dined at her table and drank her wine. The line rang twice. A secretary picked up. Senator Whitmore's office. "It is Patricia Henderson," she said, her voice attempting to regain its command. "Put him on immediately. It is an emergency." There was a pause, a long, cold silence that told her everything she needed to know. "I am sorry, Mrs. Henderson," the secretary said, her tone icy. "The senator is in a meeting, and he has instructed me to inform you that given the nature of the charges broadcast on the news, he will be returning your latest campaign donation. Please do not call this office again." The line went dead. Patricia stared at the receiver. She dialed again. This time the chairman of the country club. He had been her friend for 30 years. The call went straight to voicemail. She dialed a third number. Her lawyer, Mr. Sterling. The man she had paid thousands of dollars to just this morning. "The number you have reached has been disconnected or is no longer in service." He had dropped her. Everyone had dropped her. The video of her planting the drugs had gone viral. The financial records were public. She was radioactive. The social elite of Boston, the people she had preened for and ruled over, had excised her like a tumor. Patricia slowly hung up the phone. She walked back to the cot and sat down. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, unflinching and cruel. She looked at her hands stripped of their rings, looking old and spotted and claw-like. There was no one coming. There was no deal to be made. For the first time in her entire life, the silence around her wasn't out of respect. It was out of disgust. She was completely, utterly alone. The foreclosure team arrived at dawn, their movements efficient and devoid of sentiment. They did not care that the townhouse on Beacon Hill had been in the Henderson family for 3 generations. They did not care about the imported Italian marble in the foyer or the hand-carved banisters. To them, it was just another distressed asset, a pile of brick and mortar collateralized against a mountain of bad debt. I stood on the opposite side of the street, wrapped in my winter coat, watching the final act of Patricia's tragedy unfold. A locksmith in blue coveralls knelt before the grand oak door. The sound of his drill whining against the brass lock was shrill and biting in the morning air. It took him less than 30 seconds to destroy the mechanism that Patricia had thought protected her from the world. He popped the cylinder out, replaced it with a generic bank lock, and stood up. A moment later, a man in a cheap suit taped a bright orange notice to the wood. Seized. Property of the bank. No trespassing. I expected to feel a surge of victory. I expected to feel a vindictive thrill watching her kingdom get boarded up. But as I watched the wind tug at the corner of the orange paper, I felt nothing but a profound, quiet relief. The exhilaration of the courtroom had faded, leaving behind a stillness I hadn't felt in years. The house wasn't a castle anymore. It was just a building. It was just a shell where a lonely, angry woman had tried to buy love and enforce loyalty, only to lose both. Arthur Abernathy stepped out onto his porch next to me, holding his morning coffee. He watched the bank officials carry out a box of catalogued items likely the Silver Maria had been accused of stealing. "It is a shame about the architecture," Arthur grunted, taking a sip. "But the neighborhood will certainly be quieter. Are you going to be okay, Gwen?" I looked up at the windows of the second floor, the nursery where Patricia had tried to turn my daughter against me. The curtains were drawn, the rooms dark. The ghosts that had haunted me for a decade, the whispers of inadequacy, the fear of losing Neil, the terror of her influence had evaporated. They couldn't survive in the light of day. "I am better than okay, Arthur," I said, turning up my collar against the wind. "I am free." Dante had explained the financials to us last night. There was nothing left. The sale of the house would barely cover the mortgage and the liens from the creditors. The inheritance was gone. The trust fund miraculously was safe, locked away by the courts until Lily turned 21, far out of Patricia's reach. Neil walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back and the family he had almost destroyed, but he had seemed lighter too. The golden handcuffs were off. I took one last look at the orange sticker defacing the front door. It was an ugly end to a prestigious legacy, but it was a necessary amputation. The rot had to be cut out for the rest of us to survive. I turned my back on the townhouse. I didn't need to see what they took out or how much it sold for. That life was over. I walked to my car where a booster seat sat in the back, empty and waiting for Lily. We had a small apartment, a mountain of legal bills, and an uncertain future. But as I started the engine, I realized we had the only thing that mattered. We had each other, and for the first time, the rearview mirror was clear. The silence in our small rental apartment was heavy, but for the first time in months, it was not hostile. It was the exhaustion of survivors who had walked away from a car crash. I stood by the kitchen counter, drying a coffee mug, watching my husband out of the corner of my eye. Neil sat at the cheap laminate table, staring at his hands. He looked 10 years older than he had a week ago. The arrogant tilt of his chin learned from his mother was gone. His shoulders were slumped, burdened by a guilt that no amount of money could pay off. He stood up slowly, the chair scraping against the linoleum. He didn't walk toward me. He stopped in the center of the room, took a shaky breath, and then did something I never thought I would see a Henderson do. He sank to his knees. He didn't care that the floor was cold. He didn't care that it was undignified. He looked up at me, his eyes rimmed with red tears streaming openly down his face. "I am sorry," he choked out the words, raw and jagged. "I am so sorry, Gwen. I almost let her destroy you. I almost let her take Lily. I was so afraid of her. I spent my whole life being so afraid of her disappointment that I became the thing I hated. I chose her over you. I chose her over our daughter." I put the mug down. I wanted to run to him. I wanted to wrap my arms around him and tell him it was okay, but I stopped myself. It wasn't okay. Not yet. Love was not enough to fix the crater Patricia had blasted into our marriage. We needed concrete to rebuild this foundation. I walked over and stood before him. I reached down and touched his cheek, wiping away a tear. "I know you are sorry, Neil," I said softly. "And I know you love us." But love didn't stop you from signing that power of attorney. Love didn't stop you from believing I was a drug addict because your mother said so. He flinched, closing his eyes against the truth. I know. I am weak. I don't know how to fix it. I do, I said, my voice hardening. I am an architect, Neil. I know how to shore up a collapsing structure. But if you want to stay in this house, if you want to be a father to Lily, there are conditions. He looked up desperate. Anything. Name it. First, I said, holding up 2 fingers. You are going to therapy. Not with some country club shrink your mother recommends. With a trauma specialist I choose. You have 30 years of brainwashing to undo, and I cannot be your therapist. You go twice a week every week until the doctor says you are done. I will go, he nodded rapidly. I will go every day if I have to. Second, I continued, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. You are going to sign a post-nuptial agreement. It gives me full unilateral control over our finances. Your paycheck goes into an account I manage. I pay the bills. I manage the savings. You get an allowance, but you do not get access to the capital. You proved that you cannot be trusted to protect our assets from your mother's debts. I need to know that we are safe, Neil. I need to know you can't sign our life away again. Neil didn't hesitate. He didn't argue about his pride or his rights. He looked at me with a profound sense of relief, as if I were taking a heavy weapon out of his hands that he never wanted to hold in the first place. Draw it up, he whispered, grabbing my hand and pressing his forehead against my palm. Take it all. I don't want the money. I just want you. I just want my family back. I looked down at the man kneeling on my kitchen floor. He was broken, stripped of his ego and his inheritance. But for the first time since our wedding day, he was entirely mine. Then get up, Neil, I said, pulling him to his feet. We have a lot of work to do. The smell of charcoal and slow-roasted ribs hung heavy in the summer air, a scent so distinct and grounding that it made the memory of Patricia's sterile, lemon-scented parlor feel like a bad dream. We were in Dante's backyard, a sprawling patch of green in the suburbs that felt more alive than the entirety of Beacon Hill. There were no crystal chandeliers here. There were string lights buzzing softly overhead, a cooler full of ice and beer, and the sound of Motown playing from a portable speaker. I sat on a folding lawn chair, a cold drink in my hand, watching a scene that would have given my mother-in-law a stroke. Neil was standing by the massive smoker holding a pair of tongs. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a t-shirt and shorts, his feet bare in the grass. He was laughing, a genuine belly-shaking sound I hadn't heard in years. Dante was standing next to him, explaining the intricacies of his dry rub, clapping Neil on the shoulder with an easy familiarity. For a decade, Patricia had poisoned the well between these 2 men. She had whispered in Neil's ear that Dante was lesser, that he was an affirmative action charity case, that he didn't belong at our table. She had built a wall of racism and classism so high that Neil couldn't see the brothers standing right in front of him. But the wall had come down with the swing of a gavel. Seeing them now trading jokes and sharing a beer, I realized how much energy it had taken to maintain that hate. Without it, everything was just easy. But the most beautiful thing was not the men. It was the children. Lily was running across the lawn with Dante's twin daughters. She wasn't wearing the stiff, itchy lace dresses Patricia insisted on. She was wearing denim shorts and a stained t-shirt. She was barefoot, her hair a tangled mess of curls, and she was screaming with delight as she ran through the arc of a sprinkler. She slipped on the wet grass, landing hard in a patch of mud. My instinct, honed by years of Patricia's criticism, was to jump up and apologize, to rush over and clean her up before she could be scolded for being unladylike. I tensed, waiting for the judgment. But no one scolded her. Dante's wife Maya just laughed and yelled for them to be careful. Neil looked over, saw his daughter covered in mud, and simply smiled. "Good slide, Lil," he called out. Lily beamed, wiping a muddy hand across her face, leaving a streak of war paint. She wasn't a doll to be displayed anymore. She was a child. She was loud, messy, and absolutely free. The porcelain doll was gone, left in a box in the closet of our new apartment. She didn't need a fake friend anymore. She had real ones. I took a sip of my drink, feeling the knot in my chest finally unravel completely. We didn't have the mansion. We didn't have the millions. We were renting a 2-bedroom apartment and driving a used car. By Patricia's standards, we were destitute. But looking around this backyard, hearing the laughter that wasn't forced, seeing the love that wasn't transactional, I knew the truth. We were the richest people in the world. We had escaped the museum of misery, and for the first time, we were building a home. The flash of the camera bulbs was blinding, but this time it was not the harsh, accusatory strobe of a police cruiser or the predatory lens of a tabloid paparazzi. It was the warm, glittering light of victory. I stood on the stage of the Boston Convention Center, the heavy crystal obelisk of the Vanguard Award for Sustainable Design, cool against my palm. 6 months ago, I was a pariah. I was the architect with the mugshot, the mother accused of trafficking, the woman erased by a headline. Tonight, I was the visionary who had just redesigned the city's waterfront library. The applause washed over me, a thunderous sound that drowned out the lingering echoes of Patricia's insults. I looked out into the crowd. At table 9, I saw Neil. He was on his feet, clapping the hardest. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't worrying about what people thought. He was looking at me with pure, unadulterated pride. Next to him, Dante raised a glass of champagne, a silent salute from the man who had pulled me from the wreckage so I could build this moment. I stepped to the microphone. The room went quiet. I adjusted the stand, taking a breath that filled my lungs with clear, confident air. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. This project was about resilience. It was about taking a structure that had been neglected and damaged by storms and turning it into something that could weather any hurricane. Architecture at its core is about survival. It is about building a foundation that cannot be shaken by the elements. Later in the press room, a young journalist from the very paper that had once slandered me cornered me near the buffet. She looked nervous, perhaps remembering her publication's role in my near destruction. "Mrs. Henderson," she asked, holding out her recorder, "you have made an incredible comeback. Many women in your position facing such public scrutiny and family trauma would have retreated. What drove you to push this project to completion?" I looked at the recorder, then at the young woman. I thought about the bank accounts Patricia had drained. I thought about the power of attorney Neil had blindly signed. I thought about the helpless terror of knowing my daughter's fate rested on money I didn't control. I did not do it for the accolades. I answered, my tone serious. I did it because I am a mother, and I learned a very hard lesson this year. The journalist leaned in, sensing a quote. What lesson was that? I looked directly into the camera lens behind her, knowing that somewhere in a cell at the Framingham Correctional Facility Patricia might be watching. I learned that a woman cannot rely on anyone else to build the roof over her child's head, I said, enunciating every word. Love is important, family is everything, but financial independence is the only shield that truly works. You cannot protect your children if you do not own the keys to your own life. I work this hard so that my daughter never has to ask permission to be safe. I work so that no one can ever buy her future out from under me again. The journalist nodded, struck by the intensity of the answer. She scribbled furiously in her notebook. It is not just about designing buildings. I finished, smiling a cold, sharp smile. It is about designing a life where you are the landlord, not the tenant. I walked away, the Crystal Award tucked under my arm like a weapon. I found Neil waiting for me by the exit. He didn't ask what I said. He knew. He took my hand, not to lead me, but to walk beside me. We walked out into the cool Boston night, the city skyline rising around us, a city I helped build, a city where I finally truly belonged. The snow began to fall just after sunset, dusting the fire escape outside our living room window with a layer of fresh, clean white. For the first time in 10 years, Christmas Eve did not feel like a military operation. There were no caterers in the kitchen yelling at staff. There was no 12-foot designer tree that I was forbidden to touch. There was just us in our rental apartment with a lopsided pine tree we had cut down ourselves at a local farm. The air smelled of cinnamon, burnt sugar, and pine needles, a chaotic, messy, wonderful scent that filled the small space with warmth. I sat on the floor stringing popcorn with a needle and thread, watching my husband. Neil was struggling to untangle a ball of twinkling lights, wearing a hideous reindeer sweater that Patricia would have burned on sight. He was humming a carol off key, stopping every few seconds to sip his eggnog. He looked ridiculous. He looked happy. For a decade, Christmas had been the season of his highest anxiety, a gauntlet of criticism where he tried and failed to meet his mother's impossible standards of perfection. Tonight, the only standard was that the lights had to turn on. Lily was the director of operations. She was pulling ornaments out of a cardboard box, rediscovered treasures that had been banished to the attic in the Beacon Hill house because they weren't aesthetic enough. She held up a macaroni angel she had made in preschool, its glitter fading and one wing slightly bent. "Can we put this one right in the front, Mommy?" she asked, her eyes shining. "Grandma said this one was trash. She said it ruined the color scheme." My chest tightened for a fraction of a second at the mention of her name. The ghost was still there, lurking in the memories of a 6-year-old, but the fear was gone. "It is not trash, baby," I said, smiling. "It is a masterpiece. It goes front and center." Neil abandoned the lights and walked over. He took the macaroni angel and hung it on the most prominent branch right at eye level. "There," he said, kissing the top of Lily's head. "Perfect." Lily stepped back to admire her work, but then her face grew quiet. She looked at the angel, then at the empty chair by the window, and finally at me. The question had been building in her mind all day, I knew it. She was too smart not to notice the silence where the criticism used to be. "Mommy," she asked softly, "where is Grandma? Is she coming to see the tree?" The room went still. Neil stiffened slightly, his hand pausing on a branch. He looked at me, panic flaring in his eyes, unsure of how to explain a federal prison sentence to a first grader. We had agreed never to lie to her again, but the truth was a heavy burden for small shoulders. I put down the popcorn string and motioned for Lily to come to me. She climbed into my lap, smelling of peppermint and shampoo. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her close, feeling the steady beat of her heart against mine. "Grandma is not coming, sweetie," I said, keeping my voice calm and even. "Is she on a trip?" Lily asked. "Like when she goes to Paris?" "No, not a trip like that," I answered. I smoothed the hair back from her forehead. "Do you remember how we talked about rules? And how when people break big rules and hurt others, there are consequences?" Lily nodded slowly. "Like time out." I nodded. "Yes, like a very long time out. Grandma made some very bad choices. She hurt people because she was angry and confused. So right now she is in a place built for people who need to think very hard about their actions. She is there so she can learn that she cannot treat people the way she did." Lily processed this. Her brow furrowed in deep thought. She looked at the tree, then back at me. "Is she lonely?" she asked. I looked at Neil. He wasn't looking away anymore. He was looking at us with a sad, resigned understanding. "Yes, baby," I said honestly. "I think she is very lonely. But she is safe. And we are safe. And that is what matters right now." Lily seemed satisfied with that. She slid off my lap, grabbed a shiny red bulb, and turned back to the tree. "Okay," she chirped, the shadow passing as quickly as it had come. "Daddy, lift me up. I have to put the star on top." Neil scooped her up, lifting her high toward the ceiling. As she placed the star on the highest branch, the lights flickered on, bathing the room in a soft golden glow. I looked at the star shining bright against the dark window. Outside, the snow kept falling, burying the past layer by layer, until the world looked brand new. The apartment is finally silent. The only sound is the rhythmic breathing of my husband, asleep on the sofa, one arm hanging off the edge, his face relaxed in a way I have not seen in a decade. In the bedroom down the hall, Lily is dreaming safe beneath a duvet that costs less than one of Patricia's handkerchiefs, but provides infinitely more warmth. The Christmas tree lights cast long dancing shadows against the beige walls, turning our modest living room into a sanctuary of amber and gold. I walk to the window and press my hand against the cold glass. Outside, the city of Boston is disappearing under a blanket of white. The snow falls steadily, erasing the sharp edges of the streets, covering the grime and the noise until everything is soft and new. It is a clean slate, a tabula rasa, just like us. 6 months ago, I stood in a police station accused of a crime I did not commit, watching the woman who was supposed to be a matriarch try to sell my freedom for a gambling debt. I remember the terror that gripped my throat, the feeling that the ground was dissolving beneath my feet. I thought my life was over. I thought the weight of the Henderson name would crush me. I believed the lie that Patricia had whispered in my ear for years, that without her approval, without her money, without her lineage, I was nothing. I was wrong. The destruction of that life was not an ending. It was an excavation. We had to tear down the rotting structure to find the bedrock beneath. Patricia had the bloodline. She had the history. She had the name carved into the stone of the courthouse. And none of it mattered. It was all rot disguised as marble. She proved that you can share DNA with someone and still be their executioner. I turn away from the window and look at the macaroni angel hanging on the tree. It is crooked and glued together with hope, just like my marriage. Neil is not perfect. He is a man piecing himself back together after a lifetime of emotional conditioning. But he is here. He is not in a mansion on Beacon Hill pretending to be happy. He is here on a lumpy couch choosing me. I learned the hardest and most valuable lesson of my life this year. We are taught that family is a biological imperative, a sacred bond that cannot be broken. That is a lie. Biology is just an accident of birth. Loyalty is a deliberate choice. Family is not the people who share your last name. Family is the brother-in-law who risks his career to stand between you and a prison cell. Family is the neighbor who watches a security camera at 3 in the morning because he knows the truth. Family is the husband who finally finds the courage to walk away from his mother to save his wife. I pull my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. The snow falls harder outside, blanketing the past in silence. I am no longer afraid of the cold. I know now that the warmth does not come from a trust fund or a granite fireplace. It comes from the people standing next to you in the fire. Family is not about whose blood runs in your veins. It is about who stays standing when the rest of the world walks away. And we are still standing. The harrowing saga of Gwen and Patricia delivers a profound lesson on the true nature of loyalty and the absolute necessity of boundaries. We are often conditioned to believe that family is an unconditional sanctuary, a sacred bond that supersedes all else. However, this story exposes the dark reality that toxicity often thrives best within bloodlines. Patricia used her role as a matriarch not to protect, but to possess, wielding guilt, social status, and financial dependency as weapons. Her actions serve as a stark reminder that an abuser's need for control knows no limits, not even the safety of a grandchild. The most critical takeaway, however, lies in the concept of independence. Neil's tragic struggle illustrates the catastrophic danger of financial and emotional enmeshment. His inability to stand up to his mother sooner was the direct result of a lifetime of engineered helplessness. In contrast, Gwen's rise from a victim in a police station to a self-made architect symbolizes that true security only comes from self-reliance. You cannot build a safe home for your children if you do not own the keys to your own life. Peace purchased at the price of your dignity is always too expensive. Ultimately, the story redefines what it means to be a family. The heroes were not the wealthy blood relatives, but the friends like Dante and neighbors like Arthur who chose to do the right thing. It teaches us that family is not a birthright. It is a title earned through consistent acts of love, protection, and accountability. We must have the courage to amputate the rot in our lives, no matter how prestigious the lineage, to save the healthy parts of ourselves. Reflect on the relationships in your life. Are you sacrificing your mental health just to keep the peace with toxic family members? Stop handing them the power to destroy you. Take the first step toward building your own independence today.